The crystal chandeliers cast sharp shadows across my father's dining table as laughter erupted around me. Richard Brennan raised his wine glass, his face flushed with expensive scotch and self-satisfaction, while his circle of corporate friends leaned forward to catch every word. "And this," he gestured toward me with a dismissive flick of his wrist, "is my daughter Victoria. Still playing dress-up in her little Air Force costume." The room fell into that particular kind of silence that feels like knives. Malcolm Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial Group, tried to hide his smirk behind his napkin. Gregory Ashford stared at his plate. Thomas Whitmore cleared his throat uncomfortably. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the wall. I sat perfectly still in my uniform, the 2 silver stars on my shoulders catching the light. 23 years of service. 2 combat deployments. A career built on silence and sacrifice. And my father had just reduced it all to a child's game in front of the most important people in his world. That was the moment I realized he'd never seen me at all. Not really. Not once. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then my phone vibrated. The secure line. The one that only rang when something had gone catastrophically wrong or impossibly right. I glanced at the screen and saw the Pentagon designation code. My heart kicked once, hard, before I excused myself from the table. Behind me, I heard my father's voice dripping with theatrical concern. "Oh, don't worry, she probably has to go check on someone's email password or something technical like that." More laughter. Polite, uncomfortable, but laughter nonetheless. I stepped into the hallway, my shoes clicking against the marble floor my father had imported from Italy, and answered the call. Major General Brennan. The voice on the other end was Admiral James Keller, and he was not calling to chat about passwords. 3 days before that dinner, I'd been standing in my small cabin outside Colorado Springs, staring at the thick cream envelope that had arrived via courier. The return address was printed in elegant script. Brennan Manor, Asheville, North Carolina. My hands had gone cold despite the warmth of the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Ranger, my retired military working dog, lifted his gray muzzle from his bed and watched me with those steady brown eyes that had seen more than most humans ever would. The invitation was for a private dinner. No occasion listed. Just a date, a time, and a handwritten note from my mother at the bottom. "Your father would like you to come. Please, Tori." It's been 5 years. 5 years since I'd last set foot in that house. 5 years since the Christmas dinner where my father had announced to the entire extended family that my promotion to Brigadier General was nice, sure, but Derek's new position as Vice President of Innovation was a real achievement. Something that actually mattered in the real world. I'd left before dessert and hadn't returned a single call since. Now they wanted me back. My first instinct was to crumple the invitation and forget I'd ever seen it. But something in my mother's handwriting made me pause. The letters slanted differently than they used to, smaller and more uncertain. I thought about the last time I'd seen her, how thin she'd become, how her smile had seemed more like a reflex than an expression of joy. So I called. She answered on the second ring. "Tori?" Her voice cracked slightly. "You got the invitation?" "I did," I said carefully. "What's this about, Mom?" She hesitated. In the background, I could hear the television playing something with a laugh track. "Your father wants to make things right. He's been talking about family legacy lately, about regrets. He asked me specifically to invite you. He has some friends coming over for dinner and he wants you there." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "What kind of friends?" "Business associates. Good people. Malcolm Sterling, Gregory Ashford, Thomas Whitmore. You remember them from when you were younger." I did remember them. I remembered being 17 and overhearing Malcolm Sterling tell my father that sending a daughter to the Air Force Academy was throwing away a perfectly good Ivy League education. I remembered Gregory Ashford laughing when I'd mentioned wanting to serve my country, asking if I was trying to find a husband in a uniform since I clearly wasn't pretty enough to catch one in civilian life. I remembered Thomas Whitmore patting my head like I was a golden retriever and saying women in the military were fine for nursing and administration but not much else. Why does he want me there for that? I asked. My mother's silence stretched long enough that I almost thought the connection had dropped. Then she said quietly, I think he wants to show them you turned out all right. In his own way. In his own way. That phrase had defined my entire relationship with Richard Brennan. He loved me in his own way. He was proud in his own way. He supported me in his own way. Which meant he loved me when it was convenient, was proud when I didn't embarrass him, and supported me as long as I stayed small enough not to challenge his vision of what mattered. I should have said no. Every instinct trained into me through 2 decades of military service screamed that this was a tactical error. But I heard myself say, I'll be there. The drive from Colorado Springs to Asheville took 2 days. I could have flown, but I needed the time to think, to prepare myself for whatever was waiting. I drove through mountain passes and across plains that stretched endless and gold under an autumn sky. Ranger rode in the passenger seat, his head occasionally resting on my arm when the road got too straight and boring. At night, I stopped at budget motels and lay awake staring at ceilings while my mind replayed every interaction I'd ever had with my father. The one that kept surfacing happened when I was 19, home for winter break from the academy. I'd been sitting in his study, watching him review quarterly reports while I tried to tell him about my classes, about learning to fly, about the feeling of breaking through clouds into pure sunlight. He'd barely looked up. When I finished, he'd set down his pen and said, That's nice, Victoria. But what are you going to do when you get tired of this phase and want a real career? A phase. For years of academy training, ranked 3rd in my class, and he'd called it a phase. I joined the Air Force because Colonel Patricia Donovan came to speak at my high school when I was 16. She'd walked into that auditorium in her dress blues, her posture so straight it looked like she'd been carved from stone, and talked about service not as glory or adventure but as responsibility. The obligation we have to protect something larger than ourselves. After her speech, I'd waited in line for 30 minutes just to shake her hand. When I reached her, I'd said, I want to do what you do. She'd looked at me with these sharp green eyes and asked, Why? I'd fumbled for an answer. Because it seemed noble. Because I wanted to matter. Because I wanted to be brave. But what came out was, because I don't want to spend my life in a world where the only thing that counts is how much money you make. Colonel Donovan had smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes. Then you'll do just fine, kid. Just remember, the uniform doesn't make you special. What you do while wearing it does. She became my mentor, my commanding officer, and eventually the closest thing to a mother figure I had in the service. When she died in a helicopter crash during a training exercise 7 years ago, I'd flown home for her funeral at Arlington. My father hadn't come. He'd sent flowers and a card that read, Sorry for your loss. Like she'd been a distant acquaintance instead of the woman who'd shaped my entire adult life. I still carried her dog tags in my pocket. Not for luck or sentiment, but as a reminder of what mattered. On the back of one tag, she'd scratched a message before giving them to me a month before she died. True leadership requires no applause. I'd read those words 1,000 times, usually when I was questioning whether anything I did made a difference. When I finally pulled into Asheville, the town looked exactly as I remembered it. Upscale mountain charm, craft breweries next to art galleries, expensive cars parked along streets lined with trees that burned red and gold. My father's estate sat on the edge of the city, a sprawling property with gates that opened automatically when I pulled up. The house itself was a monument to success. Stone and timber construction, floor-to-ceiling windows, a circular driveway that could fit 12 cars. The lawn was so perfectly manicured it looked artificial. I parked my dusty sedan next to a row of luxury vehicles and sat for a moment with the engine off. Ranger whined softly, sensing my tension. I know, buddy, I murmured. I don't want to be here either. But I'd made a promise to my mother, and I'd never broken a promise in my life. That was one thing the military had beaten into me that my father never understood. Your word is your bond. Once you commit, you see it through. No matter how much it costs. I changed into my dress blues in the car, carefully pinning each ribbon and medal in place. I didn't do it to show off. I did it because this was who I was, and I was done pretending otherwise. The uniform fit perfectly, tailored after my last promotion. The 2 stars on my shoulders felt heavier than usual. When I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, I saw Colonel Donovan looking back. Straight spine, level gaze, no apology in sight. My mother answered the door. She'd aged more than 5 years should allow. New lines around her eyes, gray threading through her dark hair. But her face lit up when she saw me. Tori. She pulled me into a hug that felt fragile, like I might break her if I squeezed too tight. You look beautiful. Hi, Mom, I said softly. You look tired. She pulled back, her smile flickering. I'm fine. Just busy. Your father's been preparing for this dinner all week. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She glanced at my uniform, and something passed across her face too quickly for me to read. He's in the study with Derek. Everyone else is in the living room. Drinks before dinner. I followed her inside. The house smelled like money. Fresh flowers, expensive cologne, furniture polish. Everything gleamed. Everything was positioned perfectly. It felt like walking through a museum dedicated to Richard Brennan's success. Photos lined the hallway. My father shaking hands with governors and senators. My father at ribbon cuttings and award ceremonies. Derek at his college graduation, his wedding, holding his newborn daughter. I appeared in exactly 2 photos. My high school graduation, where I looked uncomfortable in a dress I'd hated. And one childhood picture where I was maybe 7, gap-toothed and sunburned from a beach vacation I barely remembered. Voices drifted from the living room. Loud masculine laughter, the kind that comes easy when you've never had to question your place in the world. I paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Malcolm Sterling held court near the fireplace, gesturing with a tumbler of amber liquid. Gregory Ashford lounged on the leather sofa, his wife perched beside him in a dress that probably cost more than my car. Thomas Whitmore stood by the window, checking his phone with the distracted air of someone too important to fully commit to any single moment. My mother touched my elbow. Let me tell your father you're here. She disappeared down the hallway, leaving me standing alone in dress blues while a room full of corporate executives gradually noticed my presence. Malcolm saw me first. His eyes widened slightly, taking in the uniform and the stars. Well, he said, his voice carrying that practiced charm of someone who'd spent decades networking. Catherine didn't mention we'd have military brass joining us this evening. Gregory Ashford turned, his expression shifting from curiosity to something that might have been respect or might have been calculation. Air Force? Yes, sir, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Thomas Whitmore finally looked up from his phone. He stared at me for a long moment before recognition dawned. Victoria? Richard's daughter? He set his phone down. My God, I haven't seen you since you were what, 16? 17? 17, I confirmed. At the Christmas party. He had the grace to look embarrassed. That had been the party where he'd asked me about my college plans and then laughed when I'd said Air Force Academy, suggesting I'd have better luck finding a husband at a real university. I wondered if he remembered. From the way his smile tightened, I guessed he did. Before anyone could say more, my father's voice boomed from the hallway. Gentlemen, sorry to keep you waiting. Derek and I were just finishing up some quarterly projections. He swept into the room with my brother trailing behind him, both of them in expensive suits that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. My father's eyes landed on me and stopped. For just a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise maybe. Or confusion. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar expression of mild disappointment he'd perfected over the years. Victoria, he said, his tone carefully neutral. You made it. I said I would. I kept my hands at my sides, resisting the urge to cross my arms defensively. Derek gave me a small nod, his expression unreadable. We'd never been close. 6 years older, he'd always been Dad's favorite, the son who did everything right. Followed Dad into the business world, married the right kind of woman, produced the required grandchildren. He'd called me exactly once after I made general, a stilted conversation where he'd said congratulations and then spent 20 minutes talking about his own promotion. My father turned to his guests. Everyone, this is my daughter Victoria. She's in the Air Force. The way he said it made it sound like a hobby. Like I taught yoga or sold essential oils on the side. Malcolm raised his glass slightly. Major General, your mother mentioned. That's quite an accomplishment. My father's expression tightened. He hadn't known. My mother must have told Malcolm, but she'd never mentioned it to Richard. I watched him process this information, saw the brief flash of something that might have been pride before it disappeared behind his usual mask of indifference. 2 stars, Gregory Ashford said, sounding genuinely impressed. That's rare, especially for someone your age. What's your specialty? Cyber warfare and strategic intelligence, I replied. I oversee threat assessment and response coordination for multiple theater operations. Thomas Whitmore straightened. You mean like hacking and counter-hacking? Digital warfare? Among other things, yes sir. My father made a dismissive sound. Computers. Well, I suppose someone has to keep the IT department running. He chuckled, glancing at his friends for support. Malcolm Sterling looked uncomfortable. Gregory Ashford studied his drink. But Thomas Whitmore smiled politely, and that was enough encouragement for my father. Dinner was announced before anyone could respond. We filed into the dining room where my mother had set a table that belonged in a magazine spread. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, china plates with gold trim. Name cards at each seat. Mine was positioned between Derek's wife Hannah and Thomas Whitmore. My father sat at the head of the table with Malcolm Sterling on his right, my mother at the far end looking small and tired. The first course arrived, some kind of soup with microgreens artfully arranged on top. Conversation flowed around me. Stock prices and merger talks, real estate development and market forecasts. I ate quietly, answering when spoken to, offering nothing more. Hannah tried to make small talk about her kids, showing me photos on her phone. I smiled and said appropriate things while my mind was elsewhere, already regretting this entire trip. Then my father started talking about Derek's latest success. A new contract worth $40 million, secured through brilliant negotiation and strategic thinking. Everyone congratulated my brother, who accepted the praise with practiced humility. My father beamed like Derek had just won a Nobel Prize. That's the difference between theory and practice, my father said, gesturing with his fork. Derek understands how the real world works. How to create actual value that people can measure and spend. He took a sip of wine. Not like these government positions where you shuffle papers and wait for your pension. I felt Hannah tense beside me. Even she knew this was headed somewhere ugly. But I kept my expression neutral, years of military discipline keeping my face smooth even as anger started building in my chest. My father continued, warming to his subject. Don't get me wrong, military service is admirable. For those who are suited to it. Following orders, doing what you're told, that takes a certain kind of person. He looked directly at me now. But true leadership, the kind that builds empires and changes industries, that's something else entirely. Malcolm Sterling shifted uncomfortably. Richard, I'm not sure that's entirely fair. But my father waved him off. I'm just being honest. We all know the military is basically a government jobs program for people who can't make it in the private sector. Nothing wrong with that. Society needs structure, needs people willing to do what they're told without questioning too much. He raised his glass toward me in a mock toast. And Victoria's very good at following orders. Always has been. That's why this little Air Force adventure has worked out so well for her. The table went silent. Not the thoughtful kind of silence, but the sharp, uncomfortable kind that happens when someone crosses a line so obvious that even polite people can't ignore it. My mother's face had gone pale. Derek stared at his plate. Hannah reached under the table and squeezed my hand briefly before pulling away. I set down my fork carefully. "Excuse me," I said, my voice level. "I need to take this call." My father frowned. "What call?" "Your phone hasn't rung." It had though. The subtle vibration against my hip that only I could feel, the one that meant my secure line was active. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen without letting him see the details. "It's work. I need to take it." He laughed then, that particular kind of laughter designed to humiliate. "Work? At this hour? On a Saturday night?" He turned to his friends, performing for them now. "You see what I mean? They've got her on call like she's emergency IT support. Probably someone's email went down." I stood from the table, my chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. "If you'll excuse me." I didn't wait for permission. The hallway was cooler, quieter, and I pressed the phone to my ear as I walked toward the front entrance where I could speak without an audience. "Major General Brennan," I said quietly. "General, this is Admiral Keller." His voice was crisp, urgent in the way that meant something significant had happened. "I apologize for the interruption to your evening, but we have a situation developing that requires your immediate assessment." My pulse quickened, but my voice remained steady. "What's the nature of the situation, sir?" "We've detected a coordinated cyber intrusion across multiple classified networks. The attack signature matches patterns we've been tracking for the past 18 months, but the scale is unprecedented. We're looking at potential compromise of strategic communication systems." He paused. "General, this could be the big one we've been preparing for." I closed my eyes briefly. 18 months ago, my team had identified a sophisticated threat actor we'd codenamed Phantom Protocol. Patient, methodical, capable of moving through secure systems like smoke through screens. We'd been playing a long game of cat and mouse, tracking their movements, learning their patterns, preparing for the day they made their real move. That day had apparently arrived. "What's our current defensive posture?" I asked. DEFCON 3 protocols are being implemented across all relevant commands. "But General, they're specifically requesting you. The NSA Director, the Secretary of Defense, and the Joint Chiefs want you on the coordination call within the hour. They're saying if anyone can track these people and shut them down, it's you." I felt the weight of it settle across my shoulders, familiar and heavy. This was what I'd spent 2 decades preparing for. Not the ceremony and medals and recognition, but this exact moment when everything I knew and everyone I'd trained suddenly mattered more than anything else in the world. "I'll need secure access immediately," I said. "I'm currently in North Carolina, approximately 6 hours from Peterson." "We're arranging transport as we speak," Admiral Keller replied. "There's a National Guard facility 40 minutes from your location in Asheville. A helicopter will meet you there within 90 minutes to take you directly to the Pentagon. We're setting up the command center now." I glanced back toward the dining room where I could hear my father's voice still holding court, probably explaining to his friends how government work was never really that urgent, how everything was exaggerated to make people feel important. He had no idea that in the next room, his daughter was being asked to help protect the infrastructure that kept his comfortable world running. "Understood, sir. I'll be wheels up within 2 hours." "Thank you, General." "And Victoria?" The Admiral's voice softened slightly. He'd known me since I was a captain, had been the one to recommend me for my first star. "I'm sorry to pull you away from family time." I almost laughed at that. "It's fine, sir. I'll be there." When I walked back into the dining room, they were on the main course now. Perfectly seared steaks, roasted vegetables arranged like art on each plate. My father was mid-sentence, something about market volatility, when he noticed me standing in the doorway. He broke off, irritation flashing across his face. "Everything sorted with your little emergency?" he asked, making air quotes around the word emergency. Did you get someone's printer working? I looked at him for a long moment. 23 years of service. 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan where I'd coordinated cyber operations that saved countless lives. 3 years developing the protocols that currently protected our nation's most critical infrastructure. A career spent in rooms where decisions affected millions of people who would never know my name or what I'd done. And here was my father, reducing all of it to a punchline for his dinner party. Actually, I said quietly, I need to leave. Something's come up that requires my immediate attention. My father set down his knife with theatrical precision. You're leaving? In the middle of dinner? Victoria, these people came here specifically to see you, to meet you. You can't just walk out because someone at your office needs help with their computer. Malcolm Sterling shifted uncomfortably. Richard, if it's important. It's not important, my father interrupted. That's the thing about government work. Nothing is ever actually important, they just pretend it is to justify their budgets. He looked at me with something close to pity. Sweetheart, you need to learn how to set boundaries. This is exactly why private sector executives make real money. We don't let ourselves get pushed around by every little crisis that comes up. I felt something crack inside me then. Not break, but crack. Like ice shifting before it gives way completely. For years I'd made excuses for him. He didn't understand military service. He came from a different generation. He showed love differently. But standing there in my dress blues with 2 stars on my shoulders while he explained to a room full of strangers that my work didn't matter, I finally understood that he would never see me. Not because he couldn't, but because he'd chosen not to. Dad, I said, and something in my tone made everyone go quiet. I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you that I have to leave. There's a situation that requires my expertise, and I've been called in to handle it. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. What kind of situation could possibly require a computer technician to rush off in the middle of the night? Are we being invaded by hackers? He grinned at his own joke. Thomas Whitmore chuckled politely. I can't discuss the specifics, I said evenly. But yes, actually. That's almost exactly what's happening. My father rolled his eyes. Oh, please. This is just like when you were a teenager and you'd make up excuses to get out of family events. Remember that, Catherine? She'd suddenly have some urgent study group or project due, anything to avoid spending time with us. My mother looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Derek was staring at his steak with intense focus, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Hannah had stopped eating entirely, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. That's not what this is, I said, working to keep my voice level. I'm being called to the Pentagon because there's a significant cyber threat that requires immediate coordination and response. I've been specifically requested because this is what I do. This is my job. Your job, my father repeated, and there was an edge to his voice now. Your job is to sit in an office somewhere pushing papers and pretending that staring at computer screens makes you some kind of hero. He gestured around the table. These people, they understand real work. Real responsibility. Malcolm here manages portfolios worth billions of dollars. Gregory develops properties that employ thousands of people. Thomas runs manufacturing operations across 3 continents. That's actual impact on the real world. Gregory Ashford cleared his throat. Richard, I think you're being a bit harsh. I'm being honest, my father shot back. Someone needs to be. I love my daughter, but she's wasted the last 2 decades of her life playing soldier when she could have been building something real. Something that mattered. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the staff who'd been moving quietly around the edges, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, had frozen in place. My mother's eyes were filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. Derek finally looked up, his expression unreadable. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, to explain for the 1000th time why service mattered, why protecting people mattered, why there were things more important than profit margins and stock prices. But before I could speak, my phone rang. Not the subtle vibration of the secure line, but the actual ringtone I'd set for Pentagon-level priority calls. I pulled it out. The screen showed an incoming call from a number I recognized immediately. I held up one finger, meeting my father's eyes. "I need to take this." "Of course you do," he muttered. "Always some crisis that only you can handle." I walked into the hallway again and answered. "Major General Brennan." "General, this is General Marcus Webb, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The voice was unmistakable. I'd briefed him twice before, both times on matters of national security that never made the news. "I understand Admiral Keller has already contacted you about the situation." "Yes, sir, I'm preparing to leave for the National Guard facility now." "Good." "General, I want to be clear about something. We're facing a coordinated attack on our strategic systems that could potentially compromise our defensive capabilities. The scope is unlike anything we've seen before. Every cyber warfare expert we have says you're the only person who understands this threat actor well enough to predict their next move and shut them down." I felt my heart rate pick up, but my voice remained steady. "I'll do everything I can, sir." "I know you will. That's why I'm authorizing full theater command authority for this operation. As of right now, you have operational control over all cyber defense resources across every branch of service. Whatever you need, whoever you need, you get them. Is that clear?" Full theater command. That meant I'd be coordinating not just Air Force cyber operations, but Army, Navy, Marine, and Coast Guard assets as well. Every cyber warfare specialist in the United States military would be under my direct authority until this crisis was resolved. It was the kind of responsibility that most officers spent their entire careers hoping to receive once, maybe twice. "Crystal clear, sir. I won't let you down." "I know you won't, General. We'll see you at the Pentagon." "And Victoria?" He paused. "We're counting on you." When I ended the call and walked back into the dining room, my father was explaining to Thomas Whitmore why government contractors were bleeding the taxpayers dry with overinflated budgets. He glanced up when I entered, annoyance clear on his face. "Let me guess," he said. "Another emergency that somehow can't wait until Monday morning." I looked at him, at his expensive suit and his self-satisfied smile, at the way he sat at the head of his table like a king in his castle. I thought about all the times I'd tried to make him understand, to make him see that the work I did mattered. All the explanations that fell on deaf ears, all the achievements he'd dismissed with a wave of his hand. "That was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff," I said quietly. "I've been given full theater command authority to coordinate our response to a significant cyber attack on our national defense systems. I need to be at the Pentagon within 3 hours to take operational control of the situation." The room went dead silent. Malcolm Sterling's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Gregory Ashford's eyes widened. Thomas Whitmore actually put down his phone and gave me his full attention for the first time all evening. My father stared at me. "The chairman of the Joint Chiefs," he repeated slowly, like he was testing the words. "Yes, sir. He called personally to authorize my command authority for the operation." "Full theater command," Gregory Ashford said, his voice carrying a note of respect I hadn't heard before. "That's extraordinary. I have a nephew in the Navy," he explained the rank structure to me once. "That kind of authority, that's reserved for the most critical situations." I nodded. "Yes, sir, it is." My father's face had gone through several shades of red. "You're saying the military is giving you control over an entire operation?" "You?" "Yes, Dad. Me." Malcolm Sterling set down his glass carefully. "Richard, I think you may have underestimated your daughter's position. Major General is not an administrative role. 2-star generals command divisions, run major installations, oversee strategic operations. They don't fix computers." "I'm aware of the rank," my father said stiffly. "I just don't see how someone who spends their time looking at screens can suddenly be so critical that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs calls them at dinner." "Because cyber warfare is the new battlefield," Gregory Ashford said quietly. Everything we do, every system we rely on, runs on digital infrastructure. If someone can compromise that infrastructure, they can bring down everything from power grids to financial systems to military communications. The people who protect those systems aren't technicians, Richard. They're warriors fighting a war most of us never see. Thomas Whitmore was nodding slowly. I read an article about this in the Wall Street Journal. The military has been investing billions in cyber capabilities. It's considered one of the most critical specialties in modern warfare. My father looked between his friends, something like confusion crossing his face. He'd expected them to back him up, to join him in dismissing my career as some kind of extended hobby. Instead, they were looking at me with the kind of respect usually reserved for his business accomplishments. I need to go, I said into the silence. Mom, thank you for dinner. I'm sorry I can't stay. My mother stood quickly, her napkin falling from her lap. Of course, sweetheart. You go do what you need to do. She crossed to me and pulled me into another one of those fragile hugs. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I know I don't say it enough, but I am. Something in my chest loosened slightly. Thank you, Mom. Derek stood as well. Tori, can I walk you out? I nodded, surprised. We left the dining room together, my father still sitting at the head of the table looking like someone had just rearranged his understanding of the world. In the hallway, Derek stopped and turned to face me. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I've spent years acting like Dad was right, like your career was less important than mine because you weren't making money. I bought into his worldview without questioning it. I studied my brother's face, seeing genuine regret there. Why now? Because I just watched the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff personally call you to take command of a national security operation, and I realized I'd been an idiot. He ran a hand through his hair. Hannah's been telling me for years that I need to stand up to Dad, that the way he talks about you isn't right. But I didn't want to see it because it was easier to go along with him. Derek, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted. You've been protecting our country for over 2 decades while I've been selling software and convincing myself that profit margins matter more than people's lives. I've been wrong. And I'm sorry. I felt my throat tighten. Thank you. That means more than you know. He pulled me into a quick hug, the first one I could remember receiving from him since we were children. Go save the world, little sister. And when you get back, maybe we can actually talk. Really talk, like we should have been doing all along. I'd like that, I said. I collected Ranger from my car where he'd been sleeping peacefully, grateful I'd left him there rather than bringing him into that disaster of a dinner. He sensed my tension immediately, pressing against my leg as I opened the door. Come on, buddy, I murmured. We've got work to do. The drive to the National Guard facility took exactly 38 minutes through mountain roads that twisted through darkness. I'd changed back into my combat uniform in the car, the dress blues carefully hung in the back. My mind was already shifting into operational mode, running through everything I knew about Phantom Protocol, every pattern we'd identified, every vulnerability they'd exploited before. The National Guard base was small but efficient. The officer on duty saluted when I pulled up to the gate, his eyes widening slightly when he saw my rank. Major General, we've been expecting you. The helicopter is fueled and ready. Your pilot is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, she's one of our best. Thank you, Captain. I parked and grabbed my go bag from the trunk, then walked across the tarmac to where a Black Hawk sat waiting, rotors already beginning to turn. A woman in a flight suit stood beside it, her helmet under one arm. She saluted as I approached. General Brennan, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Chen. I'll be getting you to the Pentagon tonight. We have clearance for a direct flight, estimated time 2 hours and 15 minutes. Thank you, Colonel. I appreciate the quick turnaround. She smiled slightly. When the chairman of the Joint Chiefs says jump, we don't ask how high, we just get airborne. She gestured to the helicopter. If you're ready, ma'am, we should get moving. I climbed aboard with Ranger at my heels. He'd been on helicopters before during his service days and settled immediately into the familiar environment. I strapped in and pulled on the headset as the engines increased their pitch and we lifted into the night sky. Below us, Asheville spread out in pools of light against the dark mountains. Somewhere down there, my father was probably still at his dinner table, trying to explain to his friends why his daughter's sudden departure wasn't actually that impressive. My mother would be clearing plates and making excuses. Derek might be thinking about what he'd said, or he might have already dismissed it and gone back to talking about quarterly projections. But up here, none of that mattered. Up here, I had a job to do. People to protect. A threat to neutralize. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd given up normal family relationships and conventional success for. This moment when everything I knew and everything I could do suddenly became the difference between security and chaos. The Pentagon at night looked like a fortress carved from light and shadow. As we descended, I could see increased security everywhere. Extra vehicles, personnel moving with purpose, the visible tension that came when the nation's defense apparatus shifted into high alert. Lieutenant Colonel Chen set us down with practice precision on the helipad, and before the rotors had fully stopped spinning, a young Air Force captain was jogging toward us with a tablet in hand. Major General Brennan, I'm Captain Rodriguez from the Joint Operations Center. I'll escort you directly to the command center. Admiral Keller is waiting with the full briefing team. He glanced at Ranger. Ma'am, I can arrange for your dog to be taken to the veterinary facility where he'll be comfortable. Negative, I said. He stays with me. Ranger is a retired military working dog with full security clearance. He's been in more classified briefings than most colonels. Rodriguez nodded without missing a beat. Understood, ma'am. This way please. The halls of the Pentagon thrummed with controlled urgency. People moved quickly but without panic, the kind of organized chaos that came from years of training and preparation. We passed offices where lights blazed despite the late hour, conference rooms filled with officers hunched over laptops and secure phones. Everyone we passed stopped what they were doing to salute. I returned each one crisply, aware that word had already spread about why I was here. The Joint Operations Center occupied a secure section of the building that required 3 separate security checks to access. By the time we reached the main command room, I'd been scanned, verified, and authenticated multiple times. The doors opened to reveal a space that looked like something from a science fiction film. Wall-sized displays showed maps, data streams, network diagrams. Dozens of workstations filled the center of the room, each one manned by specialists from different branches of service. At the far end, a raised platform held a conference table where senior officers were gathered. Admiral Keller saw me first. He stood immediately, and the room seemed to shift its attention in my direction. General Brennan, thank you for getting here so quickly. He gestured to the others at the table. You know most of these people already. I did. General Marcus Webb, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who'd called me during dinner. Director Patricia Vance from the NSA, who I'd worked with on several joint operations. General Raymond Torres from Army Cyber Command, Colonel Michael Zhang from Naval Network Warfare Command, and half a dozen other senior officers representing every branch of military cyber operations. General Brennan, Chairman Webb said, his voice cutting through the room's ambient noise. We have a situation that's evolving faster than we anticipated. Director Vance, if you would bring the general up to speed. Patricia Vance stood and the main display shifted to show a complex network diagram. Red indicators pulsed at multiple points like digital wounds bleeding across the infrastructure. At 1900 hours this evening, we detected coordinated intrusion attempts across 17 separate classified networks. The attack vectors matched the signature of the threat actor you've been tracking, the one your team designated Phantom Protocol. I studied the display, my mind already processing the patterns. 17 simultaneous points of entry. That's 3 times their previous maximum. They've been building capacity. Exactly, Vance confirmed. And they're not just probing anymore. These are active exploitation attempts. They're inside our systems, General. Not all of them, not yet, but they've established footholds in networks we considered hardened. General Torres leaned forward. Our initial response teams have managed to isolate some of the intrusions, but every time we close one door, they open two more. It's like trying to hold back water with our fingers. I walked closer to the display, tracking the pattern of attacks. There was something familiar here, something I'd seen before in the threat analysis my team had been conducting for months. Show me the temporal progression. I want to see the order in which these systems were targeted. An analyst at one of the workstations brought up a timeline. The attacks had started almost simultaneously, but there were micro-variations in the timing. Fractions of seconds that most people would dismiss as random variance. But I'd spent 18 months studying how Phantom Protocol operated, learning to recognize their fingerprints in the code. The drive to the National Guard facility took exactly 38 minutes through mountain roads that twisted through darkness. I'd changed back into my combat uniform in the car, the dress blues carefully hung in the back. My mind was already shifting into operational mode, running through everything I knew about Phantom Protocol, every pattern we'd identified, every vulnerability they'd exploited before. The National Guard base was small but efficient. The officer on duty saluted when I pulled up to the gate, his eyes widening slightly when he saw my rank. "Major General, we've been expecting you. The helicopter is fueled and ready. Your pilot is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, she's one of our best." "Thank you, Captain." I parked and grabbed my go bag from the trunk, then walked across the tarmac to where a Black Hawk sat waiting, rotors already beginning to turn. A woman in a flight suit stood beside it, her helmet under one arm. She saluted as I approached. "General Brennan, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Chen. I'll be getting you to the Pentagon tonight. We have clearance for a direct flight, estimated time 2 hours and 15 minutes. "Thank you, Colonel. I appreciate the quick turnaround." She smiled slightly. "When the chairman of the Joint Chiefs says jump, we don't ask how high, we just get airborne." She gestured to the helicopter. "If you're ready, ma'am, we should get moving." I climbed aboard with Ranger at my heels. He'd been on helicopters before during his service days and settled immediately into the familiar environment. I strapped in and pulled on the headset as the engines increased their pitch and we lifted into the night sky. Below us, Asheville spread out in pools of light against the dark mountains. Somewhere down there, my father was probably still at his dinner table, trying to explain to his friends why his daughter's sudden departure wasn't actually that impressive. My mother would be clearing plates and making excuses. Derek might be thinking about what he'd said, or he might have already dismissed it and gone back to talking about quarterly projections. But up here, none of that mattered. Up here, I had a job to do. People to protect. A threat to neutralize. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd given up normal family relationships and conventional success for. This moment when everything I knew and everything I could do suddenly became the difference between security and chaos. The Pentagon at night looked like a fortress carved from light and shadow. As we descended, I could see increased security everywhere. Extra vehicles, personnel moving with purpose, the visible tension that came when the nation's defense apparatus shifted into high alert. Lieutenant Colonel Chen set us down with practice precision on the helipad, and before the rotors had fully stopped spinning, a young Air Force captain was jogging toward us with a tablet in hand. "Major General Brennan, I'm Captain Rodriguez from the Joint Operations Center. I'll escort you directly to the command center. Admiral Keller is waiting with the full briefing team." He glanced at Ranger. "Ma'am, I can arrange for your dog to be taken to the veterinary facility where he'll be comfortable." "Negative," I said. "He stays with me." Ranger is a retired military working dog with full security clearance. He's been in more classified briefings than most colonels. Rodriguez nodded without missing a beat. "Understood, ma'am." "This way, please." The halls of the Pentagon thrummed with controlled urgency. People moved quickly but without panic, the kind of organized chaos that came from years of training and preparation. We passed offices where lights blazed despite the late hour, conference rooms filled with officers hunched over laptops and secure phones. Everyone we passed stopped what they were doing to salute. I returned each one crisply, aware that word had already spread about why I was here. The Joint Operations Center occupied a secure section of the building that required 3 separate security checks to access. By the time we reached the main command room, I'd been scanned, verified, and authenticated multiple times. The doors opened to reveal a space that looked like something from a science fiction film. Wall-sized displays showed maps, data streams, network diagrams. Dozens of workstations filled the center of the room, each one manned by specialists from different branches of service. At the far end, a raised platform held a conference table where senior officers were gathered. Admiral Keller saw me first. He stood immediately, and the room seemed to shift its attention in my direction. "General Brennan, thank you for getting here so quickly." He gestured to the others at the table. "You know most of these people already." I did. General Marcus Webb, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who'd called me during dinner. Director Patricia Vance from the NSA, who I'd worked with on several joint operations. General Raymond Torres from Army Cyber Command, Colonel Michael Zhang from Naval Network Warfare Command, and half a dozen other senior officers representing every branch of military cyber operations. "General Brennan," Chairman Webb said, his voice cutting through the room's ambient noise. "We have a situation that's evolving faster than we anticipated. Director Vance, if you would bring the general up to speed." Patricia Vance stood and the main display shifted to show a complex network diagram. Red indicators pulsed at multiple points like digital wounds bleeding across the infrastructure. At 1900 hours this evening, we detected coordinated intrusion attempts across 17 separate classified networks. The attack vectors matched the signature of the threat actor you've been tracking, the one your team designated Phantom Protocol. I studied the display, my mind already processing the patterns. 17 simultaneous points of entry. That's 3 times their previous maximum. They've been building capacity. Exactly, Vance confirmed. And they're not just probing anymore. These are active exploitation attempts. They're inside our systems, General. Not all of them, not yet, but they've established footholds in networks we considered hardened. General Torres leaned forward. Our initial response teams have managed to isolate some of the intrusions, but every time we close one door, they open 2 more. It's like trying to hold back water with our fingers. I walked closer to the display, tracking the pattern of attacks. There was something familiar here, something I'd seen before in the threat analysis my team had been conducting for months. "Show me the temporal progression. I want to see the order in which these systems were targeted." An analyst at one of the workstations brought up a timeline. The attacks had started almost simultaneously, but there were micro-variations in the timing. Fractions of seconds that most people would dismiss as random variants. But I'd spent 18 months studying how Phantom Protocol operated, learning to recognize their fingerprints in the code. "There," I said, pointing to a cluster of 3 attacks that had launched within milliseconds of each other. "Those 3 are feints. They're designed to draw our attention and resources while the real attack happens elsewhere." I traced the timeline forward. "Show me what happened 90 seconds after those 3 hits." The display updated. A single intrusion attempt, much smaller and more subtle than the others, had slipped into a network most people wouldn't consider high priority. The Defense Logistics Agency system that managed supply chain operations. "That's their real target," I said quietly. "Or at least, that's their entry point to reach their real target." Director Vance frowned. "The logistics system? Why would they care about supply chain management?" "Because it connects to everything," I replied, my mind racing through the architecture. DLA interfaces with transportation networks, communication systems, contractor databases. If you control the logistics network, you have pathways into dozens of other systems that would otherwise be isolated. Chairman Webb stood. "Can we shut it down? Cut them off before they can exploit those pathways?" "We could," I said slowly, "but that's what they expect us to do. The moment we isolate that system, they'll trigger whatever secondary attacks they have waiting. We'd be playing defense while they control the tempo of engagement." I turned to face the assembled officers. "We need to flip this. Instead of trying to keep them out, we need to make them think they're succeeding while we track them back to their source." Colonel Zhang looked skeptical. You want to let them deeper into our networks? General, with all due respect, that's an enormous risk. It is, I agreed. But we've been playing their game for 18 months, reacting to their moves, always one step behind. This is our chance to change the dynamic. They're committed now. They've launched their major operation. That means they're exposed in ways they haven't been before. General Torres studied the display. You're talking about a honeypot operation. Let them think they're making progress while we map their entire infrastructure. More than that, I said. I want to turn their own tactics against them. They use our networks as pathways to reach their objectives. I want to use their intrusion as a pathway to reach them. Admiral Keller was nodding slowly. A counter-intrusion. We've discussed this possibility before, but the legal and political implications have been authorized, Chairman Webb interrupted. The President signed the executive order 20 minutes ago. Given the scope of this attack, we have authorization for active cyber operations against hostile actors. General Brennan, if you can identify and neutralize this threat, you have full authority to do so through whatever means necessary. The weight of that authorization settled over the room. Active cyber operations meant we weren't just defending anymore. We were taking the fight to the enemy, following them back through their own networks, potentially launching our own attacks against their infrastructure. It was the digital equivalent of crossing into enemy territory, and the implications were enormous. I'll need my full team, I said. Major Sarah Park from Air Force Cyber Command, she's my second in this operation. Captain James Wilson, he's our best network forensics analyst. Senior Airman Lisa Chen, she can write code that does things most people don't think are possible. They're being contacted now, Director Vance said. We're flying them in from bases across the country. They'll be here within 4 hours. 4 hours. I looked at the display again, watching the red indicators pulse and spread. We don't have 4 hours. By then, Phantom Protocol will have moved beyond the logistics network into whatever systems they're really after. What do you need? Chairman Webb asked. I turned to face him. Give me access to the NSA's quantum analysis team and the Army's tailored access operations specialists. I need the best code breakers and the best offensive cyber operators you have. And I need them now. Done, he said without hesitation. Director Vance, make it happen. The next 3 hours blurred into a focused intensity I'd only experienced a handful of times in my career. We set up our operation in a secure subsection of the command center, a room within a room where the most sensitive operations took place. My temporary team assembled quickly, specialists pulled from their regular duties to work on something most of them didn't fully understand yet. I stood at the front of the room and laid out the plan. Phantom Protocol thinks they're running an infiltration operation. They believe we're scrambling to defend against their attacks. Instead, we're going to let them think they're succeeding while we embed our own code into their intrusion vectors. Every packet of data they extract, every command they send, becomes a carrier for our own payload. A Navy lieutenant commander raised her hand. General, if we're embedding code in their operations, we need to make absolutely sure they don't detect it. The slightest anomaly and they'll burn everything and disappear. Agreed, I said. That's why we're not writing new code. We're using their own tools against them. Phantom Protocol uses sophisticated polymorphic malware that adapts to evade detection. That same adaptability means we can inject instructions into it without triggering their security protocols. They'll be looking outward for threats, not inward at their own tools. Major Sarah Park had arrived during the briefing, pulled from a training exercise in Nevada. She looked exhausted but alert, her eyes bright with the kind of focus that came from years of working in high-pressure environments. General, I've reviewed the intrusion logs. Phantom Protocol is using a distributed command structure. There's no single point of control we can target. They're operating through a mesh network of compromised systems across multiple countries. I know, I said. That's their strength and their weakness. A distributed network is resilient, but it's also complex. The more nodes they have, the more opportunities they give us to find patterns and predict their next moves. I brought up a new display showing the network topology we'd mapped so far. We're not going to attack the network. We're going to become part of it. Captain Wilson, our forensic specialist, looked up from his workstation. General, I think I see what you're suggesting. If we can successfully embed our code in their operational stream, we become just another node in their network. From that position, we can observe everything they do without them knowing we're there. Exactly, I confirmed. And once we're inside, once we understand how their network functions, we can start feeding them false data. Make them think they're accessing critical systems when they're actually walking into isolated environments we control. Director Vance had joined us, watching the operation unfold. How long until you can implement this plan? I looked at my team, at the determination in their faces. We can have the initial payload ready within 90 minutes. Embedding it into their intrusion vectors will take another hour. If everything works, we should start seeing results within 3 hours total. And if it doesn't work, she asked quietly. Then we fall back to conventional defense, and Phantom Protocol probably succeeds in whatever they're actually trying to accomplish. I met her eyes. But it will work. I've spent 18 months learning how these people think, how they operate. I know their patterns better than they know them themselves. We went to work. The room fell into that particular kind of silence that comes when highly trained professionals focus on a complex task. Keyboards clicked, code scrolled across screens, quiet conversations happened between specialists as they coordinated their efforts. I moved between workstations, checking progress, answering questions, making decisions about approach and implementation. Ranger lay beneath one of the desks, his presence a calming constant in the organized chaos. Several team members reached down absently to pet him as they worked, finding comfort in the simple act of touching something warm and alive while their minds navigated through abstract digital landscapes. Major Park worked beside me, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she refined the code that would form the core of our operation. General, I need your eyes on this section. I want to make sure the polymorphic wrapper will integrate seamlessly with their existing malware. I reviewed her work, spotting a small optimization that would make the integration even cleaner. Change this variable assignment here, and adjust the timing on this loop. We need to match their operational rhythm exactly or they'll notice the variance. She made the changes, then ran a simulation. The code flowed through the test environment like water, invisible and perfect. That's it, she said softly. That's going to work. By the time we were ready to deploy, word had spread through the building about what we were attempting. Senior officers had gathered in the main command center to observe, though most of them couldn't follow the technical details of what was happening. They just knew that something unprecedented was underway, a cyber operation that could change the nature of digital warfare. Chairman Webb stood beside my station. General, are you confident in this approach? I looked at the screens in front of me, at the code we'd written and refined, at the team of specialists who'd worked miracles in under 3 hours. Sir, I'm confident that this is our best option. Whether it succeeds depends on factors beyond our control, but I believe we've done everything possible to give ourselves the best chance. He nodded slowly. Then execute the operation. You have full authorization. I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Decisions made in the next few hours would ripple outward in ways we couldn't fully predict. Success meant protecting critical infrastructure and neutralizing a sophisticated threat. Failure meant potential compromise of systems that kept the nation secure. There was no middle ground, no partial victory. Deploy the payload, I ordered. Captain Wilson's fingers moved across his keyboard, entering the final commands. On the main display, a new indicator appeared, green against all the red. Our code, embedded in Phantom Protocol's intrusion stream, flowing into their network like a ghost in the machine. For 30 seconds, nothing visible happened. The red indicators continued their pulsing progress through our defensive systems. Phantom Protocol continued their attack exactly as before, showing no sign they detected our counter-intrusion. Then, slowly, additional data began appearing on our screens. Information flowing back to us from inside their network. System logs, command structures, communication protocols. We're in, Major Park said quietly. General, we're inside their operational network. They have no idea we're there. A ripple of excitement went through the room, but I kept my voice level. Begin passive observation. I want complete mapping of their infrastructure before we take any active measures. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, start correlation analysis on all the data we're receiving. I want to know where these people are operating from, who they're working for, and what their ultimate objective is. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in patience and analysis. We watched as Phantom Protocol continued their attack, completely unaware that every move they made was giving us more information about their organization. We tracked their command nodes back through proxy servers and encrypted relay points. We identified patterns in their communication that revealed organizational structure. We built a complete picture of their operation piece by digital piece. And we discovered something that made my blood run cold. General, Senior Airman Chen called out, her voice tight with tension. I've traced the primary command node. You need to see this. I moved to her station. She'd pulled up geographical data showing the physical location of Phantom Protocol's main control system. Not in Russia or China or North Korea as we'd assumed. The signal was coming from inside the United States. Specifically, from a server farm outside of Richmond, Virginia, less than 2 hours from where I stood. They're domestic? Director Vance had appeared at my shoulder, staring at the screen in disbelief. Phantom Protocol is operating from inside the country? Not just domestic, I said, my mind racing through the implications. Look at the ownership records for that facility. I pulled up the corporate registration data. The server farm was owned by a shell company, which was owned by another shell company, which ultimately traced back to a private equity firm based in New York. A firm that had significant contracts with the Department of Defense. Chairman Webb's face had gone pale. Are you telling me we've been defending against an attack launched by one of our own contractors? Not exactly, I replied, pulling up more data. This is more sophisticated than simple contractor malfeasance. Someone has been using legitimate business infrastructure to hide an intelligence operation. The contractor probably has no idea their systems are being exploited. I traced the network connections further. But whoever set this up had intimate knowledge of both our defensive capabilities and our contractor relationships. This wasn't an external attack. This was an inside job. The implications crashed over the room like a wave. An insider threat operating at this level meant potential compromise of classified information, security protocols, defensive strategies. It meant someone with access to our most sensitive systems had been actively working against us, possibly for years. Can you identify the person or persons responsible? General Torres asked. I looked at Major Park. She was already working on it, running attribution analysis through every piece of data we'd collected. Give us 30 minutes, I said. We'll have answers. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. My team worked in focused silence, following digital breadcrumbs through layers of obfuscation and misdirection. Slowly, a picture emerged. Not of a foreign adversary or terrorist organization, but of a small group of former intelligence officers who'd gone private. People who knew our systems intimately because they'd helped build them. People who decided that their expertise was worth more on the open market than in government service. They'd been selling access, we discovered. Running a sophisticated operation where they'd maintained backdoors in systems they'd worked on during their government service, then selling that access to the highest bidder. Phantom Protocol wasn't a single entity but a service, a marketplace for digital intrusion. And their current client, the one driving tonight's massive attack, was a foreign intelligence service we'd been watching for years. We need to shut them down, Admiral Keller said when we'd briefed him on our findings. Immediately. Agreed, I replied. But we need to do it in a way that doesn't alert their clients or allow them to destroy evidence. We've mapped their entire operation. We know where the principals are located, where their backup systems are, how their command structure works. We can take them down completely, but it needs to be coordinated. Chairman Webb made a call. Within minutes, FBI cyber crime teams were being mobilized. Warrants were being prepared. Arrest teams were moving into position near the locations we'd identified. While that machinery of justice began turning, we prepared the digital side of the takedown. On my mark, I said, watching the synchronized countdown on my screen, we're going to do 3 things simultaneously. First, we're going to take control of their command network and lock them out of their own systems. Second, we're going to feed false success indicators to their current client, making them think the operation is proceeding as planned. Third, we're going to ensure that every piece of evidence, every log file, every communication is preserved and secured for prosecution. The countdown reached 0. Execute, I ordered. The digital takedown happened in seconds, but those seconds contained the culmination of 18 months of careful analysis and 3 hours of intensive preparation. I watched as our code swept through Phantom Protocol's network like a tidal wave, seizing control of every node, every server, every command pathway they'd built. On the main display, the red indicators that had been spreading through our defensive systems suddenly froze, then began turning green as we reversed the flow of their attack. Primary command node secured, Captain Wilson reported. They're locked out of their own infrastructure. They can see what's happening but they can't stop it. Secondary nodes responding, Major Park added. We have control of their entire operational network. They're completely blind now. Senior Airman Shen pulled up a communication intercept. General, we're seeing panic traffic from their principals. They're trying to activate emergency protocols, but we've already blocked every avenue they have. They're trapped in their own system. Director Vance was on her phone coordinating with the FBI teams. Richmond team has eyes on the primary facility. They're seeing people inside trying to destroy equipment. Moving in now. A pause while she listened. Suspects in custody. Equipment secured before they could complete the destruction. Similar reports came in from 4 other locations across the country. Former intelligence officers who'd thought they were untouchable, who'd believed their technical expertise made them invisible, being led out of offices and homes in handcuffs. Years of illegal operations ending in a single coordinated strike. But I was focused on something else. On my screen, I was watching the reaction from Phantom Protocol's current client, the Foreign Intelligence Service that had commissioned tonight's attack. They were still receiving false data indicating the operation was proceeding successfully. They thought they were compromising critical American defense systems when in reality they were feeding us information about their own intelligence priorities and operational methods. How long can we maintain the deception? General Torres asked, watching over my shoulder. As long as we want, I replied. We have complete control of the communication channels. We can feed them anything we choose. I brought up the intelligence they'd already revealed through their target selection and exploitation attempts. They've shown us what they care about, what they consider valuable. That information alone is worth more than anything they could have stolen from us. Chairman Webb had joined us, studying the display with experienced eyes. This is a significant intelligence coup, General. The counterintelligence value here is extraordinary. Yes, sir, I agreed. Though we'll need to coordinate with CIA and NSA on how to exploit it without revealing that we've compromised their operation. Already on it, Director Vance said, ending another call. Langley is spinning up a joint task force to handle the foreign intelligence aspect. They want you on the coordination team. I nodded, my mind already shifting to the next phase of the operation. We'd stopped the immediate attack and dismantled the domestic infrastructure that had enabled it. But the Foreign Intelligence Service behind it all was still out there, still dangerous, still actively working against American interests. What we'd done tonight had bought us time and given us unprecedented insight into their operations, but the larger game was far from over. General Brennan, Admiral Keller said quietly, pulling me aside. I want you to understand what you've accomplished here tonight. You identified a threat that had been operating undetected for years. You developed a counter-operation on the fly that not only neutralized that threat but turned it into an intelligence asset. You coordinated resources across every branch of military cyber operations and multiple civilian agencies. This is the kind of operation that will be studied in war colleges for decades. I felt the exhaustion starting to creep in now that the immediate crisis had passed. I had an exceptional team, sir. They did the real work. They executed your vision, he corrected. Don't diminish what you did here. Leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about seeing what needs to be done and empowering others to do it. He glanced at the main display where my team was still working, securing evidence and ensuring every loose end was tied down. Your country owes you a debt, Victoria. Whether most people ever know about it or not. The next few hours were spent in detailed debriefings, evidence documentation, and coordination with the various agencies that would be handling different aspects of the case. The FBI wanted everything related to the domestic conspiracy. CIA needed the foreign intelligence leads. NSA was already analyzing the technical details of Phantom Protocol's infrastructure to improve defensive protocols. Each conversation revealed new layers of complexity in what we'd uncovered. It was almost dawn when Chairman Webb finally called a halt to the immediate operations. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been working for over 12 hours straight. We have secure facilities where you can rest. The situation is stabilized, the evidence is secured, and the immediate threat is neutralized. Get some sleep. We'll reconvene at 1400 hours for the complete after-action review. The room began to clear slowly, people moving with the particular exhaustion that comes after sustained high-intensity mental work. Major Park stopped beside my station. General, that was the most incredible operation I've ever been part of. The way you saw through their deception layers, the way you turned their own tactics against them. It was brilliant. It was necessary, I replied, beginning to shut down my workstation. And it was only possible because of people like you who can execute complex operations under pressure. She smiled tiredly. Still. It was something to see. My kids ask me sometimes what I do in the Air Force. Usually I have to give them boring answers about network security and system administration. Tonight, I got to be part of something that actually felt like saving the world. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet command center with Ranger at my feet. The displays still showed green indicators where red ones had been pulsing hours earlier. Evidence that we'd not only defended against the attack but had completely reversed it, turning our adversary's operation into our advantage. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. My phone buzzed. A text message from my mother. Are you all right? Your father is very upset. Please call when you can. I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down without responding. Part of me wanted to call, to explain what had happened, to make her understand that when I'd left dinner, it wasn't melodrama or exaggeration. It was because people were counting on me to protect systems that kept millions of Americans safe. But I knew it wouldn't matter. My father would find a way to diminish it, to explain it away as government overreaction or lucky timing. He'd spent my entire adult life constructing a narrative where my career was less important than my brother's business success, and one night of crisis response wouldn't change that story he'd been telling himself for over 2 decades. Come on, Ranger, I said quietly. Let's find somewhere to sleep. The quarters they'd assigned me were small but comfortable, a room used by visiting officers in the Pentagon's secure wing. I fell onto the bed still wearing my uniform, too tired to care about proper protocol. Ranger curled up on the floor beside me, his steady breathing a comforting sound in the unfamiliar space. I thought I'd fall asleep immediately, but my mind kept churning through the operation, replaying decisions, analyzing outcomes, thinking about next steps. Somewhere in that mental replay, I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, someone was knocking on the door. I checked my watch. 1,000 hours. I'd slept for just under 4 hours. My body felt like it had been through a training exercise, stiff and sore from hours of tension. Come in, I called, sitting up and running a hand through my hair. A young airman entered carrying a tray with coffee and food. General, I apologize for disturbing you. But there's someone here who's asking to see you. He says it's urgent and personal. My first thought was that something had happened to my mother. Who is it? He says his name is Derek Brennan, sir. He's your brother? I felt my eyebrows rise. Derek was here? At the Pentagon? Send him in. The airman left and returned a moment later with my brother. Derek looked completely out of place in his business suit among all the uniforms, and his face carried an expression I'd never seen before. Something between awe and shame. "Tori," he said as the door closed behind him. "I'm sorry to just show up like this. I tried calling but your phone is going straight to voicemail." "It's on secure mode," I explained, gesturing for him to sit. "I can only receive calls from authorized numbers." "What are you doing here?" He sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped between his knees. "After you left last night, things got really tense. Dad was furious, going on about how you'd embarrassed him in front of his friends. But Malcolm Sterling shut him down. He told Dad that he'd been completely wrong about your career, that he'd just watched you get called to command a national security operation and he still didn't understand what that meant." I sipped the coffee the airman had brought, waiting for Derek to continue. "Then this morning, it was all over the news. Not the classified details, obviously, but enough. Major cyber attack thwarted. Domestic conspiracy uncovered. Several arrests made. The defense secretary gave a press conference talking about how military cyber operations had prevented a significant breach of critical systems." Derek looked at me with something like wonder. "That was you. You did that." "I had help," I said automatically. "A whole team of specialists." "A team you led," he insisted. "Tori, I did something after you left last night. I called my friend who works at the State Department. I asked him to tell me the truth about what a 2-star general actually does, what kind of authority that represents. Do you know what he told me?" I waited. "He said that major generals command divisions of 20,000 or more personnel. They oversee installations with budgets in the billions of dollars. They're responsible for strategic operations that affect national security. He said that to make major general by your age, you'd have to be not just competent but exceptional. One of the best in your entire generation of officers." Derek's voice cracked slightly. "And I've spent years acting like you had a cute little job in the military because Dad convinced me it wasn't important." "Derek, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "Because I've been complicit in Dad's disrespect for your entire career. I let him mock you and diminish your accomplishments because it was easier than challenging him. And I'm ashamed of that." He stood and began pacing the small room. "Last night after everyone left, Dad tried to explain away what had happened. He said the military was probably exaggerating the threat to justify their budget, that you got lucky being in the right place at the right time. And Mom, for the first time I can ever remember, told him he was wrong. That made me look up." "Mom stood up to him?" "She told him that he'd been wrong about you from the beginning. That he'd let his own ego and his need to be right prevent him from seeing that his daughter was serving her country with honor and distinction. She said that she was ashamed of how she'd enabled his behavior, how she'd stayed silent when she should have defended you." Derek's eyes were wet now. "They had a huge fight. Mom slept in the guest room. This morning at breakfast, she told him that he needed to apologize to you, and if he wouldn't, then she was done pretending his attitude was acceptable." I felt something shift in my chest. My mother had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and made excuses for my father's behavior. Hearing that she'd finally reached a breaking point felt both validating and sad. It shouldn't have taken 23 years and a national security crisis for her to recognize that the way my father treated me was wrong. "I drove up here because I needed you to know that," Derek continued. "I needed you to hear it from me directly that I understand now. I understand that while I've been selling software and feeling proud of my sales numbers, you've been doing work that actually matters. Work that protects people, that keeps our country safe, that requires a level of skill and dedication I can't even fully comprehend. Different work matters in different ways," I said carefully. "What you do creates jobs, drives innovation, contributes to the economy. That has value too." "Maybe," he acknowledged. "But I'm not getting calls from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm not commanding operations that prevent cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. And I think I've known for a long time that what you do is more important than what I do, but I couldn't admit it because it would mean admitting that Dad was wrong. And Dad is never wrong." I stood and walked to the small window overlooking one of the Pentagon's interior courtyards. Dad isn't going to change, Derek. You realize that, right? He's built his entire identity around the belief that business success is the only success that matters. Admitting that my career has value would require him to question that entire worldview. I know, Derek said quietly. But maybe the rest of us can change. Maybe I can stop enabling him and start being the brother you deserved all along. I turned to face him. I'd like that. I really would. But it can't just be words. It has to be real, sustained effort to build an actual relationship. Not just when there's a crisis or when you feel guilty, but consistently over time. I understand, he said. And I'm prepared to do that. Hannah has been telling me for years that I needed to fix this, that I was wrong to go along with Dad's narrative about you. I should have listened to her. We talked for another 20 minutes, making tentative plans to actually spend time together, to let his kids get to know their aunt, to build the kind of sibling relationship we'd never had. It felt fragile and uncertain, like something that could break if handled too roughly. But it was more than I'd had before. After Derek left, promising to drive back to North Carolina and face whatever fallout was still happening at home, I finally checked my phone. There were dozens of messages. Several from my mother, increasingly worried. A few from Hannah expressing support and apologizing for how dinner had gone. Nothing from my father. There was also an email from Admiral Keller marked urgent. I opened it to find a formal commendation letter along with a note. Victoria, the Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you this afternoon before the after-action review. Time TBD, but probably around 1300 hours. Wear your dress blues and bring your game face. I think you're about to have a very interesting conversation. I glanced at Ranger, who had his head tilted in that way dogs do when they're trying to understand what their humans are thinking. What do you think, buddy? Ready for round 2? He wagged his tail once, which I chose to interpret as enthusiastic agreement. The rest of the morning was spent preparing for the afternoon's meetings. I showered, changed into fresh dress blues, and spent time reviewing the detailed reports my team had compiled overnight. The scope of what we'd uncovered was staggering. Phantom Protocol had been operating for at least 5 years, selling access to compromised government systems to multiple foreign intelligence services and private actors. The domestic conspiracy we dismantled had generated hundreds of millions of dollars in illegal revenue while putting national security at risk. The individuals we'd arrested included 2 former NSA analysts, a retired Army cyber warfare officer, and 3 civilian contractors who'd maintained their access to classified systems long after their government service had ended. They'd been so confident in their technical abilities, so certain they couldn't be caught, that they'd left extensive records of their operations. Evidence that would make prosecution straightforward. At 12:30, Captain Rodriguez appeared to escort me to the Secretary of Defense's office. We walked through corridors I'd never accessed before, past security checkpoints that required the highest clearance levels. The Secretary's suite occupied a corner of the Pentagon's outer ring, with windows overlooking the Potomac River. Secretary James Morrison was a former Marine general who'd transitioned into defense policy work after retiring from active service. He was known for being direct, intelligent, and intolerant of bureaucratic nonsense. When I entered his office, he was standing at the window looking out at the river, his hands clasped behind his back. Major General Brennan, he said without turning. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. I took one of the chairs facing his desk. He remained at the window for a moment longer, then turned and walked to his desk, settling into his chair with the kind of presence that came from decades of command. I've been reading the reports from last night's operation, he began. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. You identified a sophisticated threat, developed a counter-operation in real time, coordinated resources across multiple agencies and service branches, and achieved complete operational success. All in under 12 hours. I had exceptional support, sir. The team that executed the operation deserves the credit. He smiled slightly. General, I was a Marine for 38 years. I know the difference between a good team and a good leader who makes a team great. What you did last night was leadership of the highest order. He pulled out a folder from his desk. "Which is why I want to talk to you about your next assignment." I felt my pulse quicken. "Sir?" "We're standing up a new unified command structure for cyber operations. Something that consolidates capabilities across all service branches under a single operational authority. It's going to be one of the most critical positions in our entire defense structure, commanding resources that currently exist in scattered elements across the military." He looked at me directly. "We want you to lead it. The position comes with your 3rd star and authority that will make last night's theater command look like a training exercise. 3 stars. Lieutenant General. Command of a unified cyber warfare structure." It was the kind of opportunity that most officers spent their entire careers hoping for, the kind of position that came maybe once in a generation. "Sir, I'm honored. But surely there are more senior officers with more experience in joint operations who would be better suited." "There are more senior officers," he interrupted. "But not better ones. Victoria, I've been watching your career for the past 5 years. I've seen how you think, how you lead, how you handle pressure. What you did last night proved what I've suspected for a while now. You're not just good at cyber warfare. You're transformative. You see connections others miss, you understand the strategic implications of technical decisions, and you have the moral courage to make hard calls under pressure." He leaned forward. "The nature of warfare is changing. The next major conflict won't be won or lost on a battlefield. It will be won or lost in digital space, in the networks and systems that underpin everything from power grids to financial markets to military communications. We need people who understand that reality, who can operate in that environment, who can protect our nation in domains that didn't exist a generation ago. We need you." I thought about Colonel Donovan, about the day she'd asked me why I wanted to serve. About the answer I'd given and the path it had set me on. About all the years of training and sacrifice and moments like last night when everything I'd learned suddenly mattered more than I could have imagined. "When would this assignment begin?" I asked. 3 months. We need time to get the command structure approved by Congress and to transition your current responsibilities. But we want your answer now because the entire structure of the command will be built around your leadership style and strategic vision. I looked at him, at the certainty in his eyes, the confidence that I was the right person for this role. And I thought about my father sitting in his dining room, explaining to his CEO friends that military service was for people who couldn't make it in the real world. The irony was almost painful. "Yes, sir," I said. "I accept the assignment." He smiled broadly, the first time I'd seen him do so. "Outstanding. Welcome to the big leagues, General." He stood and extended his hand. "Your promotion ceremony will be scheduled for next month. In the meantime, we'll start briefing you on the command structure and introducing you to the personnel who'll be working under your authority." As I left his office, my head was spinning. 3 stars. Unified Command. A position that would shape the future of military cyber operations for decades to come. It was everything I'd never let myself dream about because it seemed too ambitious, too far beyond what someone like me could achieve. My phone buzzed with a text from Major Park. "General, the team wants to know if you're free for lunch. We're going to the cafeteria to celebrate not having to save the world for at least another day." I smiled and texted back that I'd meet them there. As I walked through the Pentagon's corridors, I passed officers who nodded respectfully, civilians who stepped aside to let me pass, all of them part of the vast machinery of national defense that operated every day to keep Americans safe. And I realized that this was where I belonged. Not in a corporate boardroom or at society dinners, but here among people who understood that some things were worth serving, worth sacrificing for, worth dedicating your life to protecting. 3 weeks later, I found myself back in North Carolina, but this time the circumstances were different. My mother had called personally, her voice tentative but hopeful. She'd asked if I could come to the lake house, the smaller family property where we used to spend summers when Derek and I were children. She said she wanted to talk, just the two of us, away from my father and the tensions that still simmered in their home. I drove through familiar mountain roads with Ranger beside me, watching the leaves turn brilliant shades of red and gold. The lake house appeared exactly as I remembered it, a modest cabin perched on the water's edge with a wooden dock stretching into the clear blue depths. My mother was waiting on the porch, and when she saw me, her face lit up with genuine warmth. We spent the afternoon talking in a way we never had before. She told me about her own regrets, about the choices she'd made to keep peace in her marriage at the expense of defending her daughter. She cried when she talked about all the graduations and promotions she'd missed, all the times she should have stood up to my father and didn't. I told her about Colonel Donovan, about the operations I could discuss, about what service had taught me about purpose and sacrifice. As the sun began to set over the lake, painting the water in shades of amber and rose, she said something that shifted everything. "Your father called this morning. He asked if you were coming today, and when I said yes, he asked if he could come too. I told him only if he was prepared to listen instead of lecture. He said he'd try." She looked at me carefully. "He's not good at admitting when he's wrong, Tori. But I think he's starting to understand that he's been wrong about you for a very long time." I watched the water ripple in the evening breeze. "I don't need his approval anymore, Mom. I spent too many years chasing something he was never going to give me. I've made my peace with that." "I know," she said softly. "But maybe he needs to give it anyway. Not for you, but for himself. So he doesn't spend the rest of his life regretting the relationship he threw away because of pride." When my father's car pulled up an hour later, I felt my shoulders tense automatically. But when he stepped out, something about him looked different. Smaller somehow, or maybe just older. He walked to the porch slowly, and when he reached the steps, he stopped and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. "Victoria," he said. "Thank you for letting me come." We sat on the dock as darkness fell, the three of us watching stars emerge one by one over the water. My father talked haltingly about reading the news coverage of the cyber operation, about calling in favors to learn more details, about finally understanding the scope of what I'd accomplished. He talked about his own father, my grandfather, who'd worked in a factory his whole life and pushed my father to achieve more, to build something larger. How that drive for measurable success had become the lens through which he viewed everything. "I'm not good at this," he admitted finally. "At saying I was wrong. At admitting that I spent your entire adult life diminishing something I didn't understand because it didn't fit my definition of success." He looked at me directly. "But I was wrong, Victoria. About your career, about your choices, about what matters. And I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air between us. It wasn't eloquent or dramatic. It was awkward and uncomfortable, coming from a man who'd never learned how to admit fault. But it was real, and that mattered more than poetry. "I appreciate you saying that, Dad," I replied carefully. "But you need to understand that this can't be a one-time conversation. If we're going to rebuild any kind of relationship, it has to be built on actual respect for who I am and what I do. Not just acceptance, but genuine respect." "I know," he said. "And I'm going to try. I'm probably going to mess it up sometimes because old habits are hard to break. But I'm going to try." We didn't solve everything that night. Years of distance and hurt don't disappear with one conversation. But we made a start, finding small pieces of common ground, learning how to talk to each other like adults instead of disappointed parent and defensive child. When I left the next morning, my father hugged me goodbye, brief and stiff, but there. It was more than I'd had in decades. The drive back to Colorado gave me time to think about everything that had changed. In 3 weeks, I'd gone from being mocked at a dinner party to being offered one of the most important commands in the military. I'd watched my family's understanding of my life shift completely. I'd seen relationships I thought were broken beyond repair begin the slow process of healing. But the most important change was internal. I'd finally stopped carrying the weight of my father's disapproval, stopped measuring my worth by his standards. I'd found my own measure of success in the work I did and the people I served alongside. That liberation was worth more than any apology or reconciliation. When my promotion ceremony came a month later, my entire family attended. My father sat in the front row with my mother, watching as the Secretary of Defense pinned the 3rd star on my shoulder. Derek brought his whole family, and my niece asked excited questions about what generals do. After the ceremony, as people congratulated me and discussed the new command I'd be assuming, I saw my father talking to Admiral Keller. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw the Admiral gesture toward me, saw my father nod slowly, his expression thoughtful. Later, my father approached me during the reception. "The Admiral told me something interesting," he said. He said that in 30 years of service, he's only met a handful of officers with the combination of technical brilliance and strategic vision that you have. He said the command they're giving you will shape military operations for the next generation. He paused. I told him I wished I'd understood that sooner. I looked at this man who'd shaped so much of my life through his absence of approval, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of letting go. "It's not too late to understand it now, Dad." He smiled, tentative but genuine. "No. I suppose it's not." As the ceremony wound down and guests began to leave, I stood for a moment with Ranger at my side, looking at the 3 stars on my shoulder. I thought about Colonel Donovan and her words about true leadership requiring no applause. But sometimes, I realized, it was okay to accept the applause anyway. Not because you needed it, but because it represented something larger than yourself. Recognition of service, acknowledgement of sacrifice, respect for dedication to something beyond personal gain. My phone buzzed with a message from Major Park. "Congratulations, General. Ready to change the world?" I smiled and typed back a response. "Always have been." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.